Chapter 6. As Adam approached the city gate, the darkness softened and the first gleam of sunlight painted the clouds. He watched as the sky's blackness dissolved into hints of blue. The sunrise was a welcome distraction from Adam's throbbing hands and oppressive fatigue. He loved watching the earth come alive like a beautiful woman waking from her sleep. It always gave him renewed springs of hope. "Adam, were you out there all night, alone?" The gatekeeper shook his head. "One of these days the mountain people are going to get to you, and you're going to regret being so reckless." "I appreciate your concern," Adam said. "I think you may be right. Last night was..." "Did something happen out there? You look pretty rough." "I just need some rest," Adam said. "Were you at the collapse last night?" Adam nodded. "Were you the one who rescued Margaret Stedman?" "How do you know about that?" "Adam, do you know who she is? That's Royce Stedman's daughter. Stedman owns all the gold mines in the North Quarter. He's looking for you. One of his men came by here last night asking if you left the city. Do you realize what that means? If you saved his daughter, you're never going to have to work again. You're about to have wealth beyond anything you ever imagined." "Did the man tell you that?" Adam asked. "He said, 'Mr. Stedman wishes to express his gratitude,' but I know what that means. Stedman once gave a guy 20 bars of gold because he helped a boy who was being bullied. He is a very generous man, and they say he never forgets an act of kindness." A stick in the eddy, Adam thought, smiling. The gatekeeper put his hand on Adam's shoulder. "He told me that if I saw you, to send you directly to the Stedman estate. If I were you, I'd go there right now. Don't eat breakfast. Don't stop at your house. Go now." Adam smiled. "If I went there now, you might have to carry me. I've got to get some sleep. I'll go home, get a little rest, I'll get cleaned up, then I'll go." Dead on his feet, Adam had never been so glad to arrive at the Northridge neighborhood. His gold and a soft bed were just blocks away. But when he turned down his street, howls and cries shattered the morning peace and echoed through the row of houses. Adam ran to the crowd that had gathered on his front lawn. "What happened?" he asked. The circle opened, revealing the source of the screams. George's body lay motionless with his wife kneeling over him with the agonized sobs of a woman who had just lost her husband. "A looter?" Adam asked, looking at the circle of neighbors. "I don't think so," a man in the crowd answered. "Your house was the only one hit. It had to be the mountain people. They must have gotten in the city somehow before the gates closed yesterday. They were targeting you, Adam. George tried to stop them, but..." The man looked down at George's body and shook his head. George's first and last acts toward Adam had been acts of friendship, welcoming him into this world when he was alone and defending Adam's home in his death. George's wife had also been a good friend to Adam. He knelt beside the broken old woman and held her, not knowing what to say. The authorities arrived and took the body, and one by one the others left until it was only Adam and the widow. When tears were finally gone, she stood and touched Adam's face. "Thank you," she said, and went into her house. Adam did the same. The bed he had so longed for was gone with its gold frame. His entire stockpile of gold was gone. Everything Adam had worked all these years to earn. He had nothing now but the maps. The maps! Adam ran to the closet to retrieve the chest where they were hidden along with the gold bands he had received from George. It was empty. Adam fell to his knees, curled into a ball on the floor, and wept. Hour after hour pressed down on him as he peeled back the layers of his grief. It was painful to lose all his wealth, infinitely worse to lose the maps and have the final door to returning home slammed shut forever. He was heartbroken about George, but beneath all that was the deepest layer of all. The crushing reality of the emptiness and utter futility of his life. It wasn't just this world that was half real. He had become a part of this empty place, and his very life had become half real. That day at the pond was the last important moment he remembered in his existence. It was as though he had lived no life at all. He tried to console himself with the hope that he had felt just hours earlier. His life wasn't over. Margaret wanted to see him again, and the gold he had just lost amounted to pennies compared to the reward he would receive from Royce Stedman. But no matter how hard he tried to give himself hope, that empty chest loomed in the corner and seemed like the only reality in his world. An hour later, Adam was walking out the west gate of the city, wondering if he had lost his mind. He felt stabs of pain in his soul with each step, as if he were leaving life itself behind. Everything he loved was in the city, but he hated the life it gave him. He refused to look back, knowing that if he did, he would be caught forever. He no longer wanted the calm of the eddy. He must take his chances in the current. The road he found leading westward progressively narrowed, like a road that leads to a dead end in the forest and becomes more overgrown the farther it goes. Clearly, no one had been on this road in a long time. Adam knew nothing of what lay ahead, but if there were even the remotest chance the cottage was real, he must find it. Soon the path disappeared altogether. Adam was in an untouchable wilderness. He drew a chestful of air. No hint of the smells of the city. It felt good. Is this what the beginnings of adventure feel like? As he traveled westward, the world grew darker and colder, though the sun was still high in the sky. The countryside became less hospitable and travel more difficult. He hadn't noticed it before, but now he felt it, a sense of dread, imperceptible at first, filling his soul like a slow leak filling a ship, and now he felt his soul listing. He turned to look behind him. No trace of the road. He wasn't even sure exactly what direction the city was. Painful memories of his arrival in this world seized him. He had left his home behind. The only home, only security, only familiarity he had in this world was in the city. The unknown that lay ahead of him loomed like a giant curtain of lethal darkness ready to swallow him up. He tried to summon courage, even imagining his brother being with him, something he hadn't thought of in years. But memories of his brother stubbornly refused to emerge. He had no idea what his brother would say or do. He couldn't even picture him in his mind. Adam hadn't realized until now how desperate his longings for home were, even to the point of being terrified at the risk of losing the sad imitation of home that was the city. "Get a grip," he told himself. "Remember why you left the city." Reason returned and set him once more plodding forward. But as often as he fought it back, the impulse to abandon the quest returned. Go back, it whispered. The strength of the feeling astonished him. He stood still for a moment, steeling his resolve. When he resumed walking, he wondered if he might be losing his mind. Would fear overcome rational thought? Pressing on, he began to see what looked like facial expressions in the plants around him. Twisted, gnarled trees glowered at him like frozen demons ready to animate at any moment. Telling himself it was all in his mind didn't help. It only added yet another layer of fear, the thought that sanity was indeed slipping from him. On the other hand, what if his hesitancy to continue was the sanest of all his thoughts? He was leaving what he knew was safe and plunging into dangers about which he had been warned. Was he gaining freedom from an empty life, or walking blindly into a trap like a fool who turns a deaf ear to warnings? The cold penetrated his clothes and chilled him to the bone. He heard footsteps behind him and froze in place. Listening, he heard nothing. His eyes scoured the area behind him and saw no movement. Could it have been the sound of his own footsteps echoing off the trees? He walked faster. Pride kept him from breaking into a full run, but he walked as fast as he could, as if trying to outrun the unknown threat. Then came a moment of abject terror. Had he just let out a scream? He wasn't sure. His pounding heart seemed to want to break free of its cage. It was only a squirrel that had scurried across his path, but he found himself completely unnerved. Soon you will really be screaming. The thought seemed to come from a source other than his own mind. He felt something on his leg and kicked in a frantic reflex to shake it off, but it held on, squeezing tighter. It was a vine that had wrapped itself around his ankle. He pulled it off with his hands and pushed forward until another vine took hold. The tangled brush before him seemed to thicken by the moment. Soon he was unable to continue. The thicket was impassable. He searched for a way through, but the foliage had become an impenetrable wall, and the creeping vines were now relentless. He didn't know how long he had been stymied, but at this moment it was clear to him that his excursion into the unknown was over. He turned, made his best guess on the direction of the city, and began making his way home. A breeze swept across his face. What was that? He stood perfectly still, but he still felt it. The air was moving. The stillness of this world that had seemed so strange at first was now such a fact of life that movement of the air seemed an utter absurdity. Yet he could feel it. He stood still as a statue, yet the air caressed his face, his arms, his whole body, as if he were running or falling. Goosebumps covered his skin. Every nerve in his body was alert. Never before had he felt so small, as the very atmosphere moved upon him.